Hi, my name is Brandon and I'm an alcoholic and addict in recovery. And in my active addiction, and even before that, I spent an enormous amount of time either thinking about things that happened in the past or preparing for things that might happen in the future. And I realize now that that was a lot of wasted time. As I've read about in a lot of the other books that I've read on these videos, and as is discussed in a lot of other spiritual messages that you hear, the present moment is all that we have. That's all that we really know for sure that we've got. When the past is in the past, there's nothing we can do about it, and the future isn't guaranteed. So we really need to figure out, how do we focus on this present moment? And part of the way to do that is to look at, well, why are we hanging on to the past? Why are we so worried about the future? Especially when it comes to people in recovery, people in active addiction, because I know that this for me got far worse when I was in active addiction than it was at any other point in my life. So reading some about this today, looking at The Untethered Soul by Michael A. Singer, starting with this paragraph on page 151. He's starting out by talking about resisting the things that come into our life that hurt us, that cause us pain. And he says, eventually you'll see that this resistance is a tremendous waste of energy. The fact is, you're generally using your will to resist one of two things: that which has already happened or that which hasn't happened yet. You're sitting inside resisting impressions from the past or thoughts about the future. Think of how much energy is wasted resisting what already happened. Since the event is already past, you're actually struggling with yourself, not the event. In addition, contemplate how much energy is wasted resisting what might happen. Since most of the things you think might happen never do, you're just throwing your energy away. So let's talk about the past for a second. And I think it's important to address this because with all of us in recovery, we've got things in our past that we need to address. And that's why in AA, for example, and NA, doing an inventory of what's happened in our past, looking at the resentments that we built up around those events and addressing those is a really important part of the process of the healing and the spiritual growth process that we go through. But another thing that happens with a lot of addicts is trauma in the past. And, when I was in treatment, I am fortunate that I don't have severe trauma in my past. But when I was in treatment with people, I heard a lot of very traumatic stories coming out from people, and you could understand why these people hurt the way that they do. And so the natural human tendency to trauma, the natural human response to trauma, is to resist it rather than to process it. And since so many addicts have prior unprocessed trauma in their lives, it's really important that as part of the healing process, they take time to address that trauma with a professional. Is, in my opinion, really the way to go. You can also, of course, talk to your sponsor or a spiritual leader. Anybody is better than nobody, but I really think it's important to address severe trauma, especially childhood trauma, with a professional and allow yourself that space to heal with someone who can really help you walk through it. Because what happens is we end up resisting this trauma. It ends up forming some very significant issues for us later in life. And so he goes on to say that, it is not life's events that are causing problems or stress. It is your resistance to life's events that is causing this experience. And so we want to give ourselves a chance to let the trauma pass through us and let the trauma get processed through us. That is why in treatment centers, there are process groups. we had a process group every day where we would go in and talk about the stuff that was on our minds, the stuff that was bothering us, because it's important to process that. And what we find is that when we resist things and when we clam up about them and when we don't talk about them, that's when they start causing us problems. And so we practice that in treatment. We practice processing things, talking about the issues that are on our minds, so that when we get out of treatment, we know how to do that with other people in the recovery community, or with our counselor, or with our spouse, or with our preacher, or with whoever in our life we can turn to help process the issues that we would normally resist, bottle up, have problems with. So it's important for us to process the things that happen to us so that we can allow them to pass through. It's also just as important not to dwell on or try to control the future. And here's what this looked like for me in my addiction. When I would get really upset with somebody at work, for example, like somebody would do something that really upset me, and I knew that the next day there was going to be some kind of confrontation. I would get my chance to put them in their place or something like that. I would stay up late and stand outside on my porch smoking cigarettes and drinking beer and just, practicing the conversation, rehearsing the conversation that I would have with this person. And those moments where I get in a good zinger and really help them see how they had wronged me. And as often as I practice those things, I can't remember one single time where it happened the way that I planned. I can't remember one single time where, the rehearsals that I did the night before actually helped me healthfully deal with the situation the next day. And that's because I was trying to exercise some control over an uncontrollable future. And I was saying, look, if this happens, here's the way I'm going to do it. Here's the way I'm going to make things right. And the fact is that, I don't have that kind of control. And in my current state, I don't feel the need for that kind of control. There are times where it's appropriate for me to think through what I might say to someone in a certain situation, especially if I'm worried that I might say something inappropriate or say something from a place of that's less than compassionate, for example, or just say something mean-spirited. If I'm upset with somebody, then I do take some time. But this is much different than the way I used to do it. I do take some time these days to think about, well, what perspective can I take on this to be more empathetic to this person, to care more for this person, and to actually think about not what can I get out of this conversation, but how can I help this person in this conversation. And this happens a lot with, people like your spouse or your boss at work, where you're at odds a little bit with the person. It's easy to take those kind of situations and to use them as an opportunity to say, okay, how can I gain the upper hand? How can I get in control of this situation? When actually what I found is the best way to handle it is to think about things in terms of, what approach can I take that's mutually beneficial, that helps both of us? And when you take things from that angle, you can feel the shift. And when I do that, all of a sudden my need to rehearse things goes away. Because I know that as long as I'm approaching things from the point of view of, how can I help someone else? How can I help this person? And from a point of caring for that person, I don't need to rehearse anything. I don't need to control the future if I'm trying to be helpful to people, because it's going to unfold in the way that it's supposed to. But when I'm trying to control things, when I'm trying to think through, here's how the conversation's going to go, and here's how I'm going to direct it to make sure the outcome is what I want, that's when there's this level of resistance and problems starting. And so I'm going to read this last paragraph. It says, these personal events that take place in our lives leave impressions on our minds and hearts. Those impressions become the basis for asserting our will to either resist or cling. It's no deeper than that. The events may have happened in your childhood or at various points throughout your life. Regardless of when they happened, they left impressions inside of you. Now, based on these past impressions, you are resisting the current events taking place. This creates inner tension, turmoil, struggle, and suffering. Instead of seeing this and refusing to allow these past events to run your life, you buy into them. Believing they have real meaning, you put all your heart and soul into either resisting or clinging. But in truth, the entire process has no meaning. It just destroys your life. So, we don't want to live in the past. We don't want to try to control the future. We want to figure out how to live in the present moment without having it adulterated by any of the things that happened in the past or our fears for the future. And that's why in the program of AA, it's so important for us to go through the process where not only we unpack everything that happened in our past that's influencing the way we review the way we view the present moment, but we also start stripping away our fears that keep us from living in the present moment and keep us trying to prevent things happening in the future. Now that's just AA, but there's all sorts of spiritual programs and religious beliefs that do the same thing. And it's all part of the spiritual journey to try to break down the self and the way that the past has influenced what we do now so that we can actually experience the present moment, because that's where the good stuff happens. And so if we can get rid of all of the stuff around it and really focus in on what we need to do to fully experience the present moment, that's where we really start to experience this joy, this happiness, all of the things that are referred to as the promises in AA, as blessings in religious texts. And that's really the goal of any kind of spiritual program of spiritual growth. That's it for today. I'll see you back here tomorrow with more.